And we are live. Greetings, greetings, family. Welcome, welcome to another episode of the Sista Shanice show alongside our one and only esteemed guest, none other than Dr. Clyde Winters. Yay! Dr. Clyde, are you hearing me? So, yeah, let's just check that we are indeed actually live. So, family, I am looking forward to another really exciting, fantastic, blacktastic show. If you've been following the series, then I thank you so much. You will know that we have just completed 20 episodes in the series entitled African History Hidden in Plain Sight. And if you miss that series, the great thing is that you can actually go to my YouTube channel. Well, you're here in the YouTube channel right now, and you can go to the live podcast and get that series. Okay, it's been a really interesting series, and yeah, let me know your thoughts and opinions once you've watched it. And family, yeah, please do share your thoughts and opinions in the comment section. Right, I'm just trying to find me live. Have you found me live, Dr. Clyde? Are we live? Yes, there it is. Okay, fantastic. So welcome to each and every one of you. Thank you so much for joining me today for another Wednesday evening on the Sista Shanice show. When you come in, please do drop a comment. Let me know that you are in the house. And throughout the presentation today, if you leave your views, thoughts, and opinions in the chat, I will indeed be doing my best to read out as many of the comments as possible. So we're starting a new series today in our series African History Hidden in Plain Sight. And the title of the new series is The Ethnic Cleansing of Ireland. And today is episode 1. So if you are joining us today, you're joining us for the first episode in this series. And my family, you are going to be blown away. We are actually taking the conversation from a book that was recommended by you, one of my audience members, and it's entitled To Hell or Barbados. And I'm going to be reading from that book. But before I go into the book, I'm just going to do a brief introduction. Let me just check that all is well with Dr. Clyde, your end. Dr. Clyde, is all good with you? Okay, maybe he's got to get a drink of water or something. Okay, so I'm going to pull up.
Me? I'm here.
Yes, I'm hearing you. Okay, fantastic. So I'm just going to pull up the presentation, which just has a couple of slides to lay a little bit of background, just a little bit of background, because I want us to go straight into the book. And you are welcome, Dr. Clyde, to jump in at any point in time. So family, as you come through the door, please give us a thumbs up as well. Give us a like. Let us know that you are in the house, that you're seeing us and hearing us okay. And yeah, hopefully you're going to enjoy today's presentation. Right, so as I said, we're going to be mainly reading today from a book. But just to give a little bit of background, we're just going to go over to a couple of pages on this presentation, okay? So let me just pull it up now. And then I'll have to check on my phone as well, just to make sure that it's coming through okay. So my computer's doing a little spin. It likes to do a little spin and a dance. You know what? It's always slow, but I'm just grateful that it's working. So I'm not even going to complain that it's slow. So as you come through the door, please do give us a thumbs up. Please do let the family know that we are live. If you've got Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, please share the link. so that others can join us. It's always wonderful, wonderful when we get the interaction from you, our wonderful family. Let me just go over to the chat. Oh, I can see we've got Curtis in the house. Rise up, Brother Curtis. He's saying, good to see you, Dr. Winters. Oh, yeah, big up, Curtis. Great to have you in the house. And he's saying it's also good to see me in the house as well. Thank you so, so much, beloved. So, yeah, everyone, please do come through the door very quickly because we want to get off to a flying start. Right, so we're continuing our series, African History Hidden in Plain Sight. We've just completed 20 episodes where we've been around the globe from one continent to the next, and where I have provided you with archaeological, documented evidence, eyewitness accounts, monumental evidence of the fact that we as Africans were the original indigenous people of every continent in the world, okay? So if you don't believe that because you haven't been following the series, go and check out the evidence in those 20 episodes for yourself. And we're starting a new series today, and it's called The Ethnic Cleansing of Ireland, and this is episode 1, okay? So thank you so, so much for joining us. So as you come through the door, please do give us a thumbs up and a like. So this is going to be a really powerful series, family, because there is so much of our history that's hidden in plain sight. And if we were to investigate our history, we will find that there's so much of it that's been overlooked, that hasn't been discussed, that's been whitewashed. It's absolutely shocking. But you have to do the research, the investigative research yourself in order to be able to uncover a lot of our history that's been hidden from us. And we have a history that goes back hundreds of thousands of years. And so we're going to be investigating in this series one of the probably least discussed chapters of Irish history. And this is the chapters in Irish history that is all about us as Africans, and in particular, the ethnic cleansing of Ireland. A lot of you have probably heard the term the Black Irish, which, you know, is kind of swept under the carpet these days. But there is a reason why, you know, the Irish were called the Black Irish. They were called the Black Irish. Why, Dr. Clyde, were they called the Black Irish?
They were called the Black Irish because they were black, like you, and black like me. But the thing is, this is that you know, we had to understand that black didn't always have a negative connotation. Back in the day, you know, black the Old English definition of black was brilliant. You
Yes.
know, brilliant means to be light, to be bright. And so there was over time, especially as slavery progressed, that the term black became very negative. You see?
Mm.
But at the same time, in a sense, there's always been this fact that it seems as though, as you know from earlier shows by Sister Shanice, most of the world, just about the whole world, was black. But we find that it was in Ireland. We find in Ireland it was this transfer. It was this transition from white to black, and
That's the word.
it appears as though the Irish, they maintained black identity for a long time, and they didn't see anything wrong with being black much longer than maybe the English and other Europeans. You know,
Mm.
because we know the Irish and Germans, according to Benjamin Franklin, and even the Germans were dark back in the day. So again, this is evidence in a sense to show the uniqueness. It's only been in the last few hundred years that blackness is seen as negative, and that black people are seen as a negative people. Prior to the last 200 years, we were seen as the founders of civilization and the contributors of a great history, civilization, and everything.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Clyde. Dr. Clyde, you know, as you were saying, black was seen then, you know, we were seen as the ones who were bringing the light, the wisdom, the knowledge, the enlightenment to the world. You know, history is really important, and it's important for us to dig into our history because, you know, the history that we're taught not only is it a whitewashed version of history, but it's a history that actually often remembers remembers the conquerors, those who were victorious. And so it remembers the Oliver Cromwells and the likes in relation to Irish history. But it often forgets what happens to the suffering of an entire population of people that are basically just pushed into the shadows. And so, you know, this is what we're going to be talking about in this series, is what happens when they forcibly remove and transport a whole population of people, the destruction of that population, you know, and to imagine that today it's hardly spoken about, hardly mentioned in mainstream historical narratives. So this is why we are going to be focusing on that. And I'm delighted, you know, that joining me throughout this series is going to be our highly esteemed guest, our renowned, invaluable historian and researcher, none other than Dr. Clyde Winters. And we thank you for your extensive work. We thank you for the work that you've been doing on Asian history. We thank you, you know, for remembering all of the forgotten peoples, the forgotten African people across all the continents that you have bringing to light through your invaluable work. We thank you for your insights, and I look forward to our discussions this evening and on future episodes. Thank you. So in this series, we're going to be examining the devastating events, really, that transformed Ireland during the colonial era. And we're going to be asking some difficult questions, you know, like the human cost of their conquest, the human cost of that displacement and empire. And we're going to be exploring the role that Oliver Cromwell and the English colonial campaign actually had in Ireland. We're going to look at the demographic impact of what became known as the Great Irish Transportation. And we're also going to notice some striking similarities between the treatment of many of the Irish who were forcibly transported overseas and more widely known for the experiences similar or associated with the transatlantic slave trade. We're going to see so many overlaps there. Hopefully you're going to be asking some of the questions that Dr. Clyde and myself were asking as we were reading this book. We're also going to be looking at where the Irish were actually transported to, what became of some of those who disappeared from Ireland shores, and more importantly, where are their descendants today? You know, so this series, like previous series, it's never about trying to rewrite history. It's only about uncovering hidden history, our hidden history, by examining the evidence, by asking questions, and by bringing forgotten voices back into the conversation, right? So family, as you come through the house, thank you so much for joining us in this chapter, this really important chapter of our history, hidden in plain sight. It's going to be a story of conquest, displacement, survival, resilience. This is the ethnic cleansing of Ireland. Now, to lay the foundations, very importantly, from the outset for this new series, I just want to remind you that we are absolutely clear about the identity of the early inhabitants of Ireland and the British Isles. And you may recall that I actually wrote a paper a couple of years ago when I did Dr. Clyde Winters' Phenomenology Africana Research Program. And my paper was entitled The Omission of an Asian African Irish Population from Contemporary Western Education. You can get a copy of that paper from academia.edu. Just go to academia.edu, put in my name, Shanice Lindsay, and you can get a copy of that paper. And the reason why that paper is important for this series is because it actually provides you with archaeological, documented DNA evidence and more evidence of the fact that the original people of Ireland were indeed Africans. So we have to be clear that the original people, the original inhabitants of Ireland, were dark-skinned Africans like myself, like most of you who are watching, like Dr. Clyde, we were dark-skinned. It was a dark-skinned population of people. We were not, at that time, pale-skinned Caucasians, okay? So the original indigenous people were Africans. We were there in large numbers because we're very fertile as African people, okay? And so if you go out there and do the research like I did, and I did some rigorous research, examining the archaeological, anthropological, the linguistic, documented evidence, even some of the laws that were enacted at that time, it reveals that Britain actually has a hidden history that belongs to us as Africans. And we were in England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales as the original indigenous people. Yes, what am I saying? I'm saying that the lands of Britain and the original native people of Britain were us as Africans from the continent of Africa. And our history in Britain dates back at least 44,000 years, but probably much, much earlier. Could even be over hundreds of thousands of years that the first of our ancestors arrived there. So there was from the outset a significant African presence in Ireland, and, you know, as explorers, as visitors to the land, we sailed the seas, we came across new lands, we settled, you know, we had, our populations grew, we built our cities, our kingdoms, our bridges, our parks, our roads, our tunnels, our castles, our cathedrals, and we built them in our style as well. And many of those buildings are even still standing today, despite what you're going to be learning about in this series, the severe demolition and destruction of our Black societies. Okay, so get that paper, The Omission of an Asian African Irish Population from Contemporary Western Education, and it will make it absolutely, it will provide you with the sources and the evidence that I use to come to that conclusion that Britain and Ireland as well was indeed originally inhabited by us as Africans, okay? So much more I could say about that, but I'm going to leave that there for now. Get that paper. The research has been done for you. Dr. Clyde mentioned the quote by Benjamin Franklin, and I have that here as well. And it's another really important contribution because Benjamin Franklin was actually an eyewitness account as to what the racial makeup of Europe actually was back in the 17th century and 18th, 17th or 18th century. Yes, 17th century. And so we're going to hear from an eyewitness named Benjamin Franklin what he had to say about most of Europe, okay? So he said, let me read what he says here. Why should the Palatine Boers be suffered to swarm into our settlements and by herding together establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours? Okay, so he's talking about a group of people who he said are swarming into America, it was at that time. And he said that we're herding together and we've got our language, we've got our manners. And he's saying that, you know, why should we allow this to happen to the exclusion of our own? That's his own. Why should a Pennsylvania founded by the English become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them? and will never adopt our language or custom any more than they can acquire our complexion. So he was talking about a group of people who he was worried would Germanize them, and would impose their culture and their language on them. And this group of people couldn't acquire their complexion. Why? Because they were black, and they, at this time, were in that region as well, and were of the lighter hue. So, which he goes on to say, which leads me to add one remark, that the number of purely white people in the world, as it is today, family, is proportionately very small. All Africa is black or tawny. Tawny is brown. Asia, chiefly tawny. America, exclusive of the newcomers, wholly so. And in Europe, the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we call a swarty complexion. I'm sure everyone on this channel knows that swarty is basically black, as are the Germans, also the Saxons only excepted, who, with the English, make the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. Can you imagine, family, up to the 17th century, he was saying that all of Europe, the Spanish, the Italians, the French, the Russian, the Swedes, are generally what they call swarty. All Africa was black, Asian, tawny, and this very small group of people who are the minority in the world, look at what they have been able to accomplish since the 17th century. Dr. Clyde, do you want to jump in and comment at this point?
You know, I think it's very important that we understand that Benjamin Franklin, he was almost in shock. And he was almost in shock because the fact, in a sense, is that the whole world to him was just a world of just blackness, a world of brownness, a world of color folk. And he couldn't really take it. He couldn't really take it. And he said that this was the first time. Think about this now. Listen to what he said. This was going to be the first time in history where they could have a white country. You
Mm,
see? And this is what's been going on up to today, is that they've been trying to maintain the whiteness of America. But what they'll do now is that, they'll immigrate people in, they'll bring people in, they'll make the Chinese white, they'll make immigrants white. Everybody was white, even though in a sense we know that they're a minority, just as Benjamin Franklin said. But it
mm,
wasn't in a sense just the whole fact that you had to have the complexion. You didn't have to have the complexion, but if you had that white identity, it was okay.
mm. Yes, indeed. And look at what's happened in just a few hundred years. The countries that he mentioned there that were chiefly black, he said in Europe, the Spaniards, black, not today. The Italians, black, not today. The French were all black, not today. The Russians, black, not today. The Swedes, black. Wow. He was saying that all those countries were primarily made up of people of a swarthy complexion, and the Germans also. Wow, wow, wow. So he then, as Dr. Clyde goes on, was saying, it was an opportunity for them to make Pennsylvania. He was saying why. So he
But
said,
look,
yeah,
Shanice,
uh-huh,
Shanice, look at how this woman, Catherine is trying to frame this. She's trying to frame this as anglicizing, instead of in a sense really pointing up the fact that they were trying to preserve whiteness. It was like they were
mhm,
trying to preserve whiteness, but she just made it look as though, oh, the English were trying to take over the world. No, that's not what he said. He was talking
yeah,
about the complexion for protection. And they had
yes,
such a wish. But see, you know, the black immigrants from the Caribbean, the native black people over here in America, they couldn't make it white, but they're still trying to establish, if possible, a white standard, a standard that's never existed in America, the United States.
yeah. Yeah. And as you say, although they're the minority, they give the impression that they're not, that they're the majority and they are a much larger, they have a much larger share of the world population than they actually do. But they, you know, the big question is, what happened to all of the black people of a swarthy complexion across the whole of Europe? Could what happened to the people of Ireland similarly have happened to the people of Germany, Russia, France, Italy, Spain? So he goes on to say that I could wish that their numbers were increased. These are the white people, that their numbers could be increased. And while we are, as I may call it, scouring our planet by clearing America of woods, and so making this side of our globe reflect a brighter light to the eyes of inhabitants in Mars and Venus, why should we, in the sight of superior beings, darken its people? Why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America, where we have so fair an opportunity by excluding all blacks and tawny of increasing the lovely white and red? But perhaps I am pitiful. So here we have a very early example in the 17th century of someone who was very influential and powerful, stating that they have an opportunity to keep America white. And isn't that the same song that they're still singing today? And isn't it the same sentiments that just keeps flaring up time and time again, you know, by the white right wing in Europe as well? So anyway, we just put this quote in here because we wanted to make it clear at the beginning of this conversation or the presentation or the reading that we're going to have about Ireland, that, you know, Ireland, England, France, Russia, etc., right up until the 17th century was still very heavily populated by people who he calls the sons of Africa. Okay, so we're going to be homing in on Ireland, family. Here's a little map of Ireland. For those of you who are familiar with Ireland, you'll know that there are 32 counties in Ireland. And back in the days, you know, they would have all have had their kings, their castles, their lords, their gentry, you know, their landowners, who would have owned vast tracts of land that they would have inherited from their indigenous native ancestors. So get ready, family. This is going to be a really interesting presentation, or series, I should say, because it's going to be less of a presentation and more of reading. And I've put these blackamoor images in here because the blackamoors were still very much part of Europe right up until about the 18th century. And, you know, they were a formidable part of Europe up to, you know, the so-called transatlantic slave trade. So that, you know, this is the kind of regal kind of look and attire of the blackamoors. Go, do you want to jump in? Go ahead, please, Dr. Clyde.
I just wanted to say that what you have to understand, our family, is that they were called blackamoors, but they were not all Muslims. They were not all Muslims. It's very important to understand that there was a really large population of black Christians, and they call these black Christians Moors, just like they called, in a sense, the Muslims Moors, because they were dark. And I think it's very important to understand that people back in the day, they didn't go off so much of your complexion. They went off your nationality. Where did you come from? What was your home? If you came from Britain, you were British. If you came from Portugal, you were Portuguese. But then later they started saying, aha, it's the color that made you who you, and what you were. But that came as a result of what was going on among the slavery in the Caribbean and in the Americas.
Yes, that's right. Thank you so much for that. And so, you know, prior to, as you know, Dr. Clyde has told us, you know, it was very much about nationality and it was about religion. You were a Muslim or you were a Catholic or you were a Protestant, or you were a royalist. It was nationality or religion, or your tribe. But then between like the 17th and 18th century, the term blackamoor basically began to denote somebody or to describe someone of African descent. All right. And so we go into the term blackamoor, which derived a different meaning from what it did in the 7th century, when the Moors went in and brought enlightenment to Spain. So yeah, over the centuries, the kind of definition did actually change. So Africans have been in Britain throughout, from the original people right through to the medieval era, the Roman era, the Tudor period. We have been there from then till now. But we have been on a journey in this country. So let's end that brief presentation there, because we're going to go into some reading now. So hold your horses. Let me go over to the chat and see who we've got in the house. Rise up, rise up. We've got Sister Karen in the house. Great to have you in the house, Sister Bev, who's saying B1 family, brilliant first family. Yes, B1. And she's greeting all the kings and queens in the house. The researchers are here. This is not made up stuff. You don't know. We got Sister Berna in the house. Rise up, Sister Berna. Great to have you in the house as well. Wonderful, wonderful. And where's the rest of the family? They're a bit late coming through the doors today, but hopefully they will be joining us. And remember, if you missed the beginning of the show, you can always catch up on Rewind. All right. So, as I said, we're going to be reading from the book To Hell or Barbados, The Ethnic Cleansing of Ireland. And this is by Sean O'Gallaghan. And it was actually recommended by you, family, one of our listeners. Now, Sean O'Gallaghan was born in Killaloovan, Livulian, County Cork, on the 22nd of May, 1918. And he was educated at Wolstown National School and the Christian Brothers School in Donereilly. And in the latter part, he went to a military college. Skip forward, he also was commissioned in 1936 and served in Cork and later in Dublin with the Regiment of Peers, becoming second in command to the Vivian de Valera in 1940 and serving under him in Greystones, County Wicklow. Then, after he left the army, he became a journalist in Fleet Street, working on the Dispatch, the Chronicle, and the John O'London's Weekly. In 1952, he went to work on the East African Standard in Nairobi as a roving correspondent, covering events in Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Rhodesia, and South Africa. So clearly, he's someone who has military experience, extensive military experience, and journalistic experience as well. And through his work, he was actually covering a lot of events that was happening in Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Rhodesia, etc., in South Africa. So he got to know Africa very, very well. In 1956, after the publication of his first book, The Easter Lily, he became a full-time writer. And between 1956 and 1992, he actually wrote 14 books. And basically, all of his books were of an investigative nature. So he used his journalistic investigative skills to do his writing. One of his books, The Slave Trade, dealing with modern slavery in Africa and the Middle East, that book was translated into 13 languages and sold in hardback and paperback. He sold over 100,000 copies. Wouldn't I love to sell 100,000 copies of my book, Hidden in the Shadows? Family, if you don't have a copy of that book, please do grab your copy via Amazon. Oh, wow. He sold 100,000 copies. And, you know, even a full-length feature film was made of it by Melantotti of Rome. They love a slavery movie, don't they? So he wrote other books as well, such as The Jackboot in Ireland and Execution, the first part of an autobiography, Down by the Glenside, that was published in Cork in 1992. And sadly, he died when that book went to press. So we know that this is someone who has an enormous amount of experience of writing books. He's written 14 books. He's traveled extensively. He's got his journalistic skills and research style. So the book that we're going to be referencing over this series, where we're talking about the cleansing, the ethnic cleansing of Ireland, I think we can feel confident that, you know, he's somebody who's probably done quite extensive research. What do you think, Dr. Clyde, about his credentials as a writer and as an author?
I think they show the expertise that he had, and I think it also showed his ability to really, try to discover stuff. But again, when he tried to find the white Irish, he couldn't do it. But at the same but he couldn't accept the fact that the Irish were originally of a different race. And I think this is something that I think we brought out a lot. And you've done a lot of the research, and you've talked a lot about King Ofa and some of the other people. But I think that is this whole idea that white folks, especially the Irish, they don't want to believe that they're interlopers. They're interlopers. The Irish today are not the original Irish. Many of them are English people who got the names, who took on those estates as Oliver Cromwell, went into Ireland and started displacing many of the people, because see, it's hard. It's hard for you to imagine that they killed over 200,000. It was, and they believe it was more than that.
Yeah.
They killed maybe a million people. They killed them like they were rats and roaches. That's what they felt about these black Irishmen. And this is something that we really can't really, visualize or really take into account is the brutality and the evil and the cruelty that these people had. They didn't even care about the children. They didn't even care about the babies, women. They didn't even want to rape them. They just wanted to kill them, kill. And this is something that I think is just overwhelming. This whole idea of a hate, and much of it was based. I don't think it was just based on religion. I think it was also based on the fact that many of them still retain that dark complexion, and I think it was that combination, and that even today they still hate dark complexion people.
Yeah.
They'll accept the Chinese and
Mm.
Japs.
As you say, and it's really scary when we read family about the degree of hatred that must have existed amongst these people towards the ethnic Irish, for them to have committed the level of atrocities against them that they did. It's scary to know that the descendants of those people that committed those atrocities are with us today, and probably still have that capability in their DNA. I mean, when we see the horrors and the atrocities that's been meted out on our people on the continent of Africa, in the wars that are happening around the world, we can see, that same characteristic, that bloodthirsty ability to just slaughter and destroy and to genocide still exists. It's really scary. But let's get into the book. This is the introduction, and we're going to be chopping it up. We're going to be talking about it as we go through. And family, if you want to comment about anything that we're reading and talking about, please do so in the chat, and we will bring your conversation into the discussion. All right. On page 9, introduction. Right, he said, writing a book on the ethnic cleansing of Ireland in the 17th century is a daunting task, Although the expression itself is modern, it applies well to the wholesale transportation of Irish men, women, and children who were sold into slavery in Barbados and North America. All right, so already from the very outset, he is saying that the work that he's doing and what he's finding in his research into the ethnic cleansing of Ireland is that what happened was a wholesale transportation of Irish men, women, and children who were sold into what? Slavery in Barbados and North America. Who were the people who were sold into slavery in Barbados and North America? Who were the original slaves of Barbados and North America? He said they were Irish. But what is the complexion of the people of Barbados? And what was the complexion of the original slaves that were sold into slavery in North America? I want you to hold that in the back of your head. He said, I had written books on slavery previously. The slave trade dealt with slavery in the Sudan, which is still taking place. He said, the books I wrote on the white and yellow slave trades dealt with girls being sold into prostitution in Europe and the Far East. He said, the collapse of the Iron Curtain has greatly increased the trade in Europe. In the Far East, female children and young girls are still a disposable commodity. Writing about Irish slavery is a different matter. He said so little material is available on the subject that we do not even know the numbers of people transported. One historian, Reverend Aubrey Gwynn, SJ, who did considerable research on the subject in the 1930s, estimated that over 50,000 men, women, and children were transported to Barbados and Virginia between 1952 and 59. That's just 7 years. Within 7 years, this Reverend Aubrey Gwynn says about 50,000 men, women, and children were transported to Barbados and Virginia. But what became of them, he's asking? Although I am not a historian, I determined to find out. There are no Irish records. They were destroyed when the Public Records Office in Dublin was burned in 1922. The state press, the state papers in the English Public Records Office in Kew yielded some information, as did the shipping register of the period, giving details of some of the ships engaged in the transportation, as well as the names of their masters. But this was not enough. Did any records exist of the people transported or of their lives in the sugar fields of Barbados or in the tobacco fields of Virginia? One thing is certain, there is no record of any having ever returned, nor of any account of their sufferings. I felt the answer must be in Barbados. I wrote to the librarian of Barbados Museum and Historical Society. 3 weeks later, I received a reply from Mrs. Betty Shannon, the librarian. In a letter, she informed me that the library contained a quantity of files on Irish, Scottish, and African slaves. It was more than I could have hoped for. He said, I left for Barbados in August 1993, and this book is a result. So, Dr. Clyde, do you want to jump in at this stage? He was on a mission, wasn't he? He was on a mission to Barbados to try and find, the descendants of the Irish.
Yes, he was on a mission, but it was a mission impossible. And but I think that so many people, they want to. Most historians today, they want to disconnect the ancient history with the contemporary and later history, you see. And so therefore, although they have the archaeological evidence that these were black people, they refuse, in a sense, to say that they continue to be of that ethnicity.
Yeah.
But what makes it even worse is that they refuse to even talk about ethnicity in regards to Europe. Look at how they really try to avoid that. And and when you really hear and you read Benjamin Franklin when he's talking about the Germans, and then just to think that was in what, 1751 or thereabouts. 1751, they were still dark, but by 1951, less than 100 years later, they were white and called themselves Aryans, called themselves the master white race, and that's something to really think about. It is that, but we refuse, in a sense, Europeans refuse to connect the two. They like to always keep the history disjointed, and that's one of the reasons why they get mad when they can't find themselves. You are there, but you just didn't look the way you look today. But they don't want to combine the two because it's very difficult to believe that so much of Europe changed as the black gentry, the black elite in Europe began to import in all those mercenaries from the Caucasus Mountains, and how bringing in those mercenaries and having all those concubines, those uh, those uh, those concubines from Ukraine, the big whores today. But anyway, but we're not going to talk about that.
That's right. Rise up, rise up. And so, he's on a mission. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Clive. So he's got some estimations about the number of people that were sold into slavery, but from Ireland. But we're going to read as we go on that those numbers get much higher. Okay, so chapter 1, the effusion of blood. And he's got a quote here from Oliver Cromwell, and it says, I am persuaded that this is a righteous judgment of God upon these barbarous wretches who have imputed their hands in so much innocent blood, and that it will tend to prevent the effusion of blood for the future. Right, that was a letter that was written by Oliver Cromwell, and you can see from what he's writing that he's referring to the people of Ireland as barbarous wretches. And he said that their hands are basically dripping with blood. And that is, he was referring to the blood of the English. Before I go any further, let me just welcome everybody in the house who's just joined us. Kashiba's in the house from Maryland in the USA. Welcome, welcome. Great to have you in the house. We've got the Jamaica drum cut in the house. Great to have you in the house. In Medea, rise up, rise up. Simone's in the house. Greetings back at ya. Sabina's in the house. Rise up. Sister Verna's in the house. Awesome. Sister Kep's in the house. Thank you so much. Kev says the researchers are here. Yeah, this is not made up stuff. Thank you so much. So if you've got any comments on what we've read so far, please do drop your comments in the chat. So let's go into chapter 1. The Civil War in England was over. Many of the vanquished cavaliers lay in jails and lockups, there to await transportation to Barbados. Wow. I mean, that first sentence is so loaded. So what we know is from this is that there was obviously the Civil War in England, and that by the time it was over, a lot of the cavaliers, who were the cavaliers? These cavaliers actually lay in jail lockups. They were prisoners and they were waiting to be transported to Barbados. So we know from that a lot of the people who were transported initially after the Civil War to Barbados were prisoners of war. They were what they called cavaliers, the fearless fighters who would have been fighting against the British because they didn't want the British to take over their land. So, so they were awaiting transportation to Barbados after the execution of Charles I, and many of you know it's very questionable, the image of King Charles I that we've got out there, because when you read the description of King Charles I, the description suggests he was of a swarty complexion, which we know to be my complexion. So we're not going to go into that just now, but know that they executed King Charles, and in so doing, what they had hoped is that they would be ending the monarchy in Ireland and that there would be a new republic established with Oliver Cromwell as the president of its Council of State. And its 40 members were mainly merchants with a sprinkling of lawyers and army officers. So here we have Oliver Cromwell setting up his own parliamentary group made up of 40 merchants, some lawyers, and some army officers. They've killed the king, and the people are taking over to rule Britain. So many problems faced the new Commonwealth. There was discontent in the country and problems with the army, including a mutiny in Banbury and at Salisbury among the troops destined for Ireland. This mutiny was quelled by Cromwell and Sir Thomas Fairfax, who had 3 of the ringleaders shot. Cromwell's greatest preoccupations, however, was with Ireland. Since the beheading of the king and resignation of the royalist Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, James Butler, Earl of Ormond, his greatest fear was that all classes of Irishmen, these are the Protestants and the Catholics alike, would unite to invade England. He said, if we do not endeavour to make good our interest there, and that timely, we shall not only have our interests rooted out there, but they will in a very short time be able to land forces in England and to put us to trouble here. I had rather be overrun with a Cavalierish interest than a Scottish interest. And I would rather be overrun with a Scottish interest than an Irish. Oh, such was the hatred for the Irish. And I think of all of this is most dangerous. If they shall be able to carry out their work, they will make this the most miserable people in the earth, for all the world knows their barbarism. Dr. Clyde, any comments? They're calling the Irish barbarous, most dangerous.
You know, that's because if you remember, even when you look at some of the cottages in Ireland today, they kept a lot of that Black or African identity. They kept a lot of that identity that they had developed before the English had come in. But I think that, you know, again, whenever you're conquering a people, whenever you want to become the new rulers, you're going to lie on them. You're going to make them seem barbarous, make them seem, you know, low life, so that you can hate them. And see, a lot of this was dealing with hate. And what makes it so bad is that it looks like it's something about being in Europe. You know, it seems as though if you're in Europe, you have this murderous genocidal spirit, it seems. And that although we may think of Black people as being civilized, and Black people being, in a sense, people who care about mankind and they have a relationship with God Almighty, we find in a sense that yes, they've had a relationship with God Almighty for many years, but at the same time, we're very prejudiced. We're very prejudiced against each other, and we in a sense can really go off hinges when it comes to religion. And today we don't see religion as being playing such an important role in society. But back in the day, that was their being, their entire looked like their entire identity was based upon I'm a Protestant, I'm a Catholic, you know, and I think that this is something that is hard for us to understand today.
True, Dr. Clyde, absolutely. And this amply shows that Cromwell's frame of mind before leaving for Ireland, like Dr. Clyde said, they demonized the Irish. They made them out to be like cockroaches, barbarous people, you know, who've got blood dripping on their hands. They built up such a hatred towards the Irish. And that's what they do, as you were saying before, you know, to justify really committing the most heinous crimes against them. So,
And also, but if you think about it, a lot of it had to do with that whole idea of land. They
yeah.
wanted Ireland. They wanted those new lands. And all you got to remember is that they've always had this problem. Is that remember much of the wealth and most of the families back in Europe in the old days went to the firstborn. The children, the sons, the sons after the firstborn, they usually didn't have that great an inheritance. And so then many members of the gentry, they saw Ireland as a place where they could get that land, where they could get a foothold, and they could, in a sense, be able to have the land because see, it's the land that's always been the wealth to most mankind. Because if you had your place, you could build a house, you could grow your own food, and so then it was all about land and providing some place for the English to be able to send their gentry where the gentry could find the land, because it wasn't any land in Britain. It
Mhm.
was already taken up.
Yeah. And isn't that the case today? That a lot of the wars today is about land, about taking the land away from the native people, from the owners of that land, to make that land their own, so that they can, access the resources, so that they can populate that land with their own people. This is exactly what happens in Ireland. This is what's happening in South Africa. They're taking the land away from the indigenous people. The white South Africans own about 70% or more of all of the farmland in South Africa. It's always about the lands. So Cromwell, for him, it was all about the land. It was all about taking the land from the Irish. And his fear was that the young Charles, who had been declared king in Scotland immediately after his father's death, would land in Ireland, rally the people to the royalist cause, and lead an invasion to England. In the summer of 1649, it seemed to Cromwell that Ireland had become a royalist state, and the prospects of a successful English invasion of that country were receding with every passing day. On the 15th of March, 1641, the Council of State nominated him, that's Oliver Cromwell, to command the troops for the invasion of Ireland. Cromwell hesitated for several reasons. In the first place, his health had not been good since the previous Christmas, when he had a breakdown. He was also determined that he should have a free hand in Ireland, and that the forces under his command would be properly equipped and provided for, as he did not want the soldiers to follow him out of personal loyalty. And so finally, on the 30th of March, he accepted the nomination, saying that in matters not who is our commander in chief, it matters not who is our commander in chief, if God be so. So here they are, putting God at the forefront of their evil intentions. Now, the author continues by saying, all was now set for the invasion of Ireland and the conquest of a country from the barbarous wretches, in inverted commas, barbarous wretches, who had spilled so much innocent blood in the rebellion of 1641. In 1641, 8 years before the invasion of Ireland, the Irish rose in rebellion against the English and Scottish planters who had seized their lands during the Elizabethan plantations. Now, the rebellion began in Ulster, which was the most heavily planted, and soon spread throughout the country until only Dublin and Derry remained in English hands. At the beginning of this rebellion, only peasants took part, armed with pikes and pitchforks. They fell upon their settlers, killing men, women, and children indiscriminately. Dr. Clyde, do you want to comment on this 1641 rebellion, when the peasants rose up against the English planters?
I think that it's very important to understand is that most revolutions are what the Chinese would call revolution from above. In other words, most revolutions are done by the middle class, and the middle class, in a sense, because of the fact that they're in between the upper classes and the lower classes, they're able, in a sense, to use their wealth. They're able to use their wealth and their ability to maybe employ people to take over. But this was unique in the sense is that it didn't begin with the middle class. It began with the common man. And that made it very dangerous because see, if you ever allow the regular people to be unified, of course, it's more more regular people than it is the rich or the landed people with the money. So naturally, they didn't see it in their interest, and
Mhm.
that's one of the reasons why we find this great rebellion, because see, many of the Irish that came over as indentured servants, because of the fact that they were black when they came in the beginning, then they were treated no different from the so-called Africans.
Mhm.
But I think that something that's very important and that a lot of people need to understand is that Barbados was not the average colony in relationship to the British. Barbados was basically a place where they sent black Irishmen. These were Europeans who they enslaved first before they brought in maybe the African.
Mhm. Rise up for that. Thank you, Dr. Clyde. And so, whoops, where am I? Blah, blah, blah. Yes. So then, so we've just heard there that this was unique in that it was the ordinary citizens who rose up against the English planters. So who were the English planters? The English planters were the ones who the English government had planted in Ireland. They confiscated the lands of some of the Irish who had owned that land, and they'd given that land to their own people. A bit like what's happening again in South Africa, where these Boers have seized the land belonging to the Africans. Well, they did the same thing here in Ireland, only what happened in 1641 is that the ordinary citizens, they picked up the peasants, they call them peasants, they picked up their pikes, their pitchforks, or anything that they could arm themselves with, and they killed the settlers, the English settlers, the men, the women, and the children. You continue reading. Sir John Temple, who was in Dublin Castle at the time of the rebellion broke out, wrote in his history of the horrid rebellion in Ireland in 1646. He wrote, "The crisis burst upon us with the suddenness of a violent torrent." He claimed that the rebels, inflamed by Jesuits, did march on furiously, destroying all the English, sparing neither sex nor age, most barbarously murdering them, and that with greater cruelty than was ever used among the Turks or the infidels. So this paper that he wrote was obviously designed to inflame the whole situation that had happened. I mean, wow, it's just like, there's been a stabbing recently in England, and anywhere you read about this Sikh person who stabbed the white boy, it's not just it didn't just stab him, they write it as a horrific stabbing, a horrific event. So basically, they're pulling on the emotions here of the British about this situation in Ireland. So get a copy of that if you can. History of the Horrid Rebellion in Ireland. And then you can read about what he had to say about it. He claimed that the rebels were inflamed by the Jesuits. These were the priests, and that they marched on furiously, destroying the English, sparing neither sex nor age, and most barbarously murdering them. Sir John Temple gave the figure of those killed as 100,000. Dr. Beatty, a royalist who later changed sides to become Cromwell's personal physician, described the Irish as a mixed rabble, part papists and part savages, guilty in the highest degree of all those crimes, and gave the number of settlers slain as 200,000. W.E. Lecky's History of Ireland, published in the middle of the 18th century, gave the number of those killed at just 4,000, which is today accepted as being closer to the true figure. So we have three different figures here. We have someone who wrote quite recently in the middle of the 18th century who put the figure at 4,000, but then we have records from those who were at the scene, who claimed that the figures was more like between 100,000, possibly as many as 200,000. So that's really important when we're doing our research in history. Who do you believe? When you've got three very different figures like this, John Temple saying 100,000, you've got, who's wrote the 200,000? You've got Dr. Bates saying that, oh, it was 200,000. Yeah, and you've got John Temple and Dr. Bates, who were around at the time. And then you've got W. Lecky, who wrote in the 18th century, that's like 100 years later, who's saying, no, it was about 4,000 it was killed. Who do you believe? Let me know your thoughts in the chat. So King Charles I believed the exaggerated accounts of the massacre and accompanying atrocities committed by the Irish, and instructed his forces in Ireland to prosecute the rebels and the traitors with fire and sword. Now, this is really interesting because obviously this is before King Charles himself was beheaded, yeah? And so King Charles is obviously trying to disassociate himself from the incident that happened in 1641 when maybe up to 200,000 English planters were actually slaughtered. King Charles, probably to appease the English, you know, because he was very unpopular among the English anyway, he instructed his forces to go out and prosecute the rebels and the traitors with fire and sword. So he was turning his army against, you know, the people of Ireland. And he said that he also sent a message to Parliament that he intended to put himself at the head of an army and go to Ireland to chastise those wicked and detestable rebels, odious to God and all good men. Parliament replied that it would consider his departure from England equal to a formal abdication of the throne. So Charles obviously knew that if he left, he would have to abdicate the throne. So what did he do? He stayed. So Bulstrode Whitlock, a member of the House, said that the Irish would be rooted out by a new and overwhelming plantation of English, and that another England would be speedily found in Ireland. The Lords of the Council ordered Lord Ormond, then Lieutenant General of the Army in Ireland, to burn, spoil, waste, consume, destroy, and demolish all the places, towns, and houses where the said rebels are, and to kill and destroy all the men there inhabiting, able to bear arms. Dr. Clyde, what do you think about the instructions that the Lord Council ordered against the Irish in response to that?
I think it was diabolical, and it was diabolical because the fact is this is that they didn't want to, in a sense, they didn't want to just rule, but they wanted to dominate the land. They wanted to exterminate. They came to really exterminate the Irish people so that they could, in a sense, replace them. And I think for those of you who've heard about the so-called Irish immigrants of the after the potato famine, these were not the original Irish. Many of these people had immigrated from England. You know, many of them were Catholics from England. That the Catholics who moved from England to Ireland so that they could dominate, you know, the Irish landscape. But these were not Irish; they were mainly Catholic Englishmen.
Yeah. So very, very importantly here, we have a situation where in response, in retaliation to the Irish taking back their land, the British have said, we're not going to allow this to happen. They're going to send in an army to burn, spoil, waste, consume, destroy, and demolish all the places, the towns and houses where the rebels were. And remember, by the time the rebel finished, there was only 2 counties that was left to the English. And we know that there's at least 32 counties today in Ireland. We'd have to check how many counties there were back then. So basically, like Dr. Clyde said, they were going to exterminate, you know, the Irish. But most of the British at that time, just a little correction there, most of them were actually Protestants. and parliamentarians, I believe, but that become clear as we go through. So he said, if they're old enough to bear arms, kill them, destroy them, all the men who were inhabited in those counties who were able to bear arms. So that means whether they were part of the 1641 uprising or not, the army was going to come in and was going to annihilate them. That there were massacres of Protestants by Catholics in the early days of the rebellions cannot be denied. So there were massacres of the Protestants by the Catholics. Yeah, so the Catholics were mainly the Irish at that time. In the early days of the rebellion cannot be denied. They were perpetuated by the peasantry whose hatred for the settlers was endemic. Wow. So, you know, unlike South Africa, there's a situation there where they have a love and an endearment for their colonizers and their settlers. But in Ireland at the time, they detested the English. They didn't want them on their land. They wanted Ireland for the Irish. They didn't want the English on their land. And remember, the English at that time were probably blacks as well as whites. There would have been white mercenaries in the armies. There still would have been black people in positions of authority like parliament and among the gentry, you know, and as Dr. Clyde was saying early on, you know, it wasn't just about race at this time. It was fundamentally a religious war and a war for land. The English wanted to take the land from the Irish. Okay, so just like we've got in Sudan at the moment, black on black violence, you know, this isn't anything new, sadly, in our history. It's just that because we haven't learned from our history, we are repeating the same mistake again. When we finished annihilating ourselves in Sudan, who do we think is going to move into that space? Yeah, the same people who are financing the atrocities, the UAE, the Arabs. That is their purpose for arming the militias in Sudan. And so we have a sad history of fighting each other based on religion, based on nationality. You know, it's nothing new. So they had an insatiable hatred of those English settlers. The leaders of the rebellion, Rory O'More and Lord Maguire, Sir Philip O'Neill, and others, soon brought them under control. It was not what actually happened that mattered, however, but that the English believed what had taken place. So, you know, the incidents of 1641 may well have been totally exaggerated, but the English believed that it happened. And so, as far as they were concerned, it happened. So the leaders of the rebellion, who were just named there, were soon brought under control. The Irish seemed to the Englishmen of that time of a lower race. Do you want to comment on that for us, Dr. Clyde, or anyone in the chat? We are reading here that the Irish seemed to the Englishmen of that time of a lower race. What are your thoughts on that, family? Let's go over to the chat, see what comments we've got. Rise up, Kashiba. Does the word dub in Dublin mean black? Yes, it does.
Dub.
Dub. I've come across that, yes, before. It does indeed mean black, and Dr. Clyde is agreeing with us there as well. Rise up, Sister Afrojamo's in the house. Wagwan, good to have you here. She said, Wagwan, Sister Shanice, wonderful, nice to be with real Africans watching from Ghana. We got Ghana in the house. We got the USA in the house. We got the UKK in the house. You know, we have the Jamaica Jamkra in the house from Jamdon. Rise up, family. So what are your thoughts on what we're reading so far? The Jamaica Jamkra rising up, Sister Afrijamo in the house. Yes, It's nice to have the family. I did hear from Brother Kwame. He intended to come today. I don't see him in the house as yet. I hope all is well with you, beloved. We've got Tom's in the house who says, so I talked to my grandma and she told me that part of our lineage is from Ireland with the surname Kilpatrick, coming to Virginia all the way to Tallahassee. We are related to all the Kilpatricks, white or black. Oh, rise up, rise up. Now you're going to read, remember, we're reading here about the strategy of the English. The English was to, their strategy was to annihilate the Irish and to take over their land. And as Dr. Clyde said very early on, not only did they take over the land, but they took over the estates of the Irish. They took the heritage of the Irish, and they even took their names. So we're going to read further on as well that a lot of these are Englishmen who were given, you know, the vast tracts of Irish land were soldiers in Oliver Cromwell's army. And because he couldn't afford to pay them with money, he paid them with land that he confiscated from the Irish. The Irish who were confiscated, who had their land confiscated, if they weren't slaughtered or murdered, then they were sent to Barbados or Virginia, and later on also to Jamaica as prisoners of war into enslavement. Okay, so bear that in mind, that your estate was probably taken over by an Englishman who then claimed your name, your estate, and your heritage. Okay, back to this. Now, where are we? Yeah, we read that there were massacres of the Protestants by the Catholics in the early days of the rebellion. And we read that the rebellion leaders, Rory O'Moore, Lord Maguire, Sir Phelim O'Neill, and others, soon brought them under control. All right. Now, the Irish seemed to the Englishmen at that time of a lower race. To Cromwell, it was to be a contest between the honest English and the murderous and treacherous Irish. You see how they do just as they do now. He said pamphlets published before and during the English Civil War fueled the hatred of the English for the Irish. They were depicted as a subhuman species, undeserving of pity or mercy. An extract from one of these pamphlets is sufficient to show the virulence of the hatred that the Puritans had for the Irish people. Now, propaganda, we know, is a weapon of war. Propaganda is used to fuel hatred during wars. And this is what they do. I mean, this was the whole kidnapping thing, you know, the Israel-Palestinian kidnapping that triggered the war, the 9/11 that triggered the war there. You know, they need something to fuel the population to hate the opposition, to justify them going in and annihilating them without having to, you know, hear any dissent from their population. So this is what they did. They demonized the Irish and portrayed them as murderous and barbarous and treacherous people who were less than, who were subhuman, who were not full human. Doesn't this all sound familiar? Yeah? Okay, let's hear from this read from this pamphlet. These Irish, incidentally called anthropophagy, man-eaters, have a tradition among them that when the devil showed up, our savior, when the devil showed our savior all the kingdoms of the earth and their glory, he would not show them Ireland. but reserved it for himself. So he was saying when the devil was showing their savior all the kingdoms of the earth for their glory, the devil didn't show them Ireland. The devil kept Ireland for himself. Wow, wow, wow. They were the very offal of men, dregs of mankind, reproach of Christendom, the bots that crawl on the beast's tail. I beg upon my hands and knees that the expedition against them may be undertaken whilst the hearts and hands of our soldiery are hot, to whom I will be bold to say briefly, happy is he who shall reward them as they have served us, and cursed is he that shall do the work of the Lord negligently. Cursed be he that holdeth back his sword from blood. Yea, cursed be he that marketh not his sword drunk with Irish blood. Wow, wow, wow. Dr. Clyde, I mean, he's cursing any soldier, any man, whose sword is not drunk, blood drunken with Irish blood.
They saw this. They saw this as a way to, by building up this hate, they saw this as a way to get the British, the English, to really tolerate some of the injustice that they were going to do. See, the plan was to take the land, but you can't take the land if it's already occupied. And this is very important to understand, and that's one of the reasons why when I know when over the years I've been talking about the Irish immigration to to America, but we forget about the genocide. 200,000, a million. I mean, they killed them like they killed them, and because they wanted to free the land, and then when you think about the Irish immigration in the 1800s, those are two different people. Those are two different people. Those people who had left Ireland as a result of potato famine, these in a sense were usually descendants of many of the English Catholics who migrated into Ireland. But see, these English Catholics, although they took the land, they didn't know how to work the land. They didn't know how to really make the land productive, and that's why they had that famine. Because the fact is, this is that many of them came in, and they came in as just gentry. They came in as just hustlers. They came in as just people trying to get rich quick. But they took the land, and they couldn't really, in a sense, tell the poor immigrants how to grow stuff in Ireland. That's why the Ireland had that famine, and that famine was a result of the original Irish being sent to the Caribbean, and these newcomers not having the knowledge of the Irish soils in Ireland to be able to make the land productive and be able, in a sense, to sustain themselves. So that was mainly because of the fact they didn't really know Ireland, or they didn't have that expertise.
Yes, indeed. And what are your thoughts about, the way that they demonize the Irish? The English was saying basically they were like treating them as an inferior race. What does that tell you, Dr. Clyde?
It tells it What it tells you is that to really inflame people, you had to show a difference. You had and you want to make this difference based on blood. Remember that back in the days, all they talked about was English blood, Irish blood, Portuguese blood. The one drop rule. If you had one drop of black blood, you were black. And so then everything was based upon this blood, this bloodlust. And I think that's one of the reasons why it was so much, hate, so much destruction, and so many massacres. And in the book they talk a lot about the massacres. That they massacred people, and sometimes if you surrendered, they massacred you. If you fought, they massacred you. So it didn't really matter if you fought or didn't fight. And that's one of the reasons why many of the Irish used to fight to the death, because they knew they couldn't surrender. And so then that, so because, and then what made it so bad, it was really dastardly. When you think about what they made it so that the Irish men who fought had to leave Ireland. And then the women, then their wives, they weren't even allowed to come back to their families. They were not allowed to come back to their families. This is something that is very, that we can't really understand. Is that they took these men away from their wives, their children, and they sent them to fight in Spain and like that. And then they took the Irish women and sent them to the Caribbean to work on the plantation. Many people don't understand is that much of the early European labor in the Caribbean, these were black Irish women who were, in a sense, the backbone of the plantations. In the book, I think they talked a lot about the fact they wanted some white women to come. You wasn't going to get them from Ireland at that time. You couldn't get no white women from Ireland back at that time.
Thank you, Dr. Clyde. And sorry, my internet seems to be glitching a little bit. So get ready to jump in if it kicks me out, please. Kashiba says, how does a name like Kilpatrick relate to an African language group? The language of Ireland is Gaelic. Does Gaelic relate to any Asian African tongue or language? Now, that's a really good question, Kashiba, and I should have done a session on linguistics and the language family tree, because there's been a lot of research that has been conducted into languages, all the languages around the world. And what they found is that all the languages lead back to a mother tongue African language. So there are a number of trees. So you've got your roots, which is the African language, and you've got the different branches of languages. And you have to remember that these languages were actually developed over hundreds of thousands of years. Okay, and so we'll do a separate presentation on that. But Dr. Clyde, I know you've done a lot on linguistics and languages. Do you want to comment on that question for us?
I really think it's something that's very hard, and I've been thinking about this issue for a number of years, and that is English an African language, and that's something I think is going to require further research, because if you remember, they had so many different dialects. There were so many different dialects in Britain, even up until the 1940s. People in Britain had different dialects, and so it's very difficult to go back to this the linguistic identity of these people. But I'm beginning to believe that the original English was related to African languages. But the thing is, this is that it would take some reconstruction and going back, and remember the change in tone and all that. So it's kind of difficult. But if you notice, many of the meanings of the words are different today than they were in the past. And so then it'll take further research. I'm not the man who can do it. I'm lazy. But maybe someone
Well,
who hears this
got
talk
something
might
on
be able
that.
to do the research. They might not be as lazy as
If
me.
you remind me, I'll bring something on that up next strong, because I do have a chart with all of the family of languages and the different branches of the family of languages, and you can see the connection. So yeah, we'll come back to that, but it's really important for us to understand, how language changes, as you say. I mean, even the English language that we speak today is different to the English language that we spoke during the 17th and 18th century. Back then, we were speaking Old English. And what does Old English sound like? Jamaican patois. If you listen to how Jamaicans speak, the Jamaicans are speaking Old English. Yeah, they're still speaking the Old English that they were talking when they were transported from England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales to the New World, the Caribbean, and the Americas. Okay, but I do have a chart on that. There's been a lot of research that has been done on that, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel on that. Okay, let's see if I can catch where we were. Okay, right. So now they're talking about, you know, making sure that their swords are drunk with Irish blood. Wow, wow, wow. So many Irish soldiers crossed over to England and took part on the King's side during the Civil War. On the 24th of October, 1644, Parliament passed an ordinance that no quarter shall henceforth be given to any Irishman or Papist born in Ireland, captured on land or at sea. In the same year, a Captain Swanley, a naval officer fighting for Parliament, captured a ship out of Dublin, bound for Bristol, with 70 Irish soldiers and 2 women on board. Family, we've heard this story before. Do you know what they did? Can you guess what they did to those Irish who were on that ship? The captain threw them all overboard, tied back to back. Is that not a scene from something straight out of the slave movies? When they tie the black Africans back to back and then throw them all overboard, overseas.
But Shanice, it appears to me that when you really read this book, you find that many of the atrocities that they later in a sense did to the so-called African slaves, they really began when the British was taking over Ireland, and that these in a sense were practices that the English used in a sense to dominate the Irish, and they brought that beastliness. They brought in a sense that hatred over to the New World as they began to enslave African people. They just in a sense began to treat them like they treated the Irish. And see, the only way the only way that you can understand that the hate that they had for the Irish is to recognize the black identity of the early Irish. Is that they saw keeping the Irish down not just as a national thing, but also as a racial policy. And I think that's why they were so mean. And then if you notice, they didn't treat the Irish of the 19th century the way they treated the Irish of the 17th century or the 1600s, because they were two different groups, two different
Yeah.
ethnic populations. I think this is something our family that we always had to keep in mind.
Yes, indeed, Dr. Clyde. So a lot of what they were featuring in the films in terms of the treatment of the Africans during the so-called transatlantic slave trade, we see it happening here first in Ireland. We are reading about it happening in Ireland first. So those images of Black Africans being tied back to back and then thrown overboard, here we have it here.
And
And
but I think also when you think about that title, From Hell to Barbados, in other words, Ireland for the Black Irish was like hell. It was like hell in a sense, in that many Black Irish would rather take their chances in the New World than stay in Ireland. And it is
yeah,
really sad that Ireland was such a terrible place if you were Black back in the day.
yeah, yeah, because there was a genocide happening. The English wanted their land and they didn't want the Irish, and they wanted to get rid of the Irish. So, as a result of him throwing all 70 Irish soldiers and the 2 women overboard, one of the London papers reported on it. This paper was called The Perfect Durinol, and they wrote approvingly of Captain Swanley's actions and stated that he made water rats of the Papish vermin. Parliament acclaimed his actions and presented the Captain Swanley with a gold chain worth £200. He was rewarded with a gold chain worth £200 for throwing 70 men and 2 women overboard Wow, such was the hatred of the Irish. When the parliamentarians under Colonel Thomas Mitton captured Shrewsbury in February 1645, they took 50 Irish prisoners. Mitton selected 12 by lots and hanged them in the town square. In retaliation, Prince Rupert ordered the hanging of 13 Roundheads taken at Oswestry. Parliament protested vigorously against this outrage and ordered the Earl of Essex to explain to Rupert that there was a very great difference between Englishmen and Irishmen. Sir William Breton hanged every Irish prisoner he took, saying that the Irish soldiers deserved the noose because they were guilty of great spoils and cruelties, horrid rapes and insolencies. Oliver Cromwell concluded that hanging the Irish was a righteous judgment of God upon these barbarous wretches. Wow. So right there, family, you know, we're hearing that they were hanging the Irish. They were selecting them by lots and hanging them. And then when a group of English were hanged in the same way, it was regarded very differently. Do you want to comment on that, please, Dr. Clyde?
Not really. I think you've explained it well enough.
Okay, all right, let's carry on. Right, so it is not necessary to go too much into the convoluted state of Irish politics before the arrival of Cromwell in Ireland. The Irish were, as usual, divided. Thomas Carlyle, the 19th century historian, wrote of them. Parties on the back of parties at war with the world and with each other. In overall command of the royalists was James Butler, 12th Earl of Ormond. The Butlers were an old Anglo-Irish Catholic family, but Ormond was a Protestant, having been made a ward of court and raised in England. So here we're hearing we've got in Ireland as someone who was raised in England as a Protestant, and then of course we've got the Anglo-Irish Catholic families. So they're at war with each other and at war with themselves. And in the meantime, but let me read here. But Ormond was a Protestant, having been made a ward of court and raised in England. In his army, 3 of his Catholic brothers and several cousins held high commands. Canon O'Rourke, in the Battle of the Faith in Ireland, wrote. Do you want to read what they wrote there, Dr. Clyde? Do you want to do a bit of reading? Let's see if we can bring Dr. Clyde in here.
Give me a minute.
Okay. All right. So I'll just read that little bit and then you'll continue. We're on page 16. Undoubtedly, Ormond was a man of great parts. His weakest point was perhaps the want of high military talents. Imagine they're putting somebody in a position that required a high level of military skills, but he was clearly lacking. But he had diplomacy, but that is plotted. He was a veritable Palmerston, born before his time. Ormond hated the Catholic religion with an intensity which can only belong to a pervert. The old Irish, being Ormond and all Palmerston looked upon as an alien and inferior race, unfit for the same rights and privileges as Englishmen. Oh my God. So even Ormond, who was supposed to be leading the Irish army, who himself was a Protestant, looked upon his own people because he was brought up in England. There seems to be a snobbery about the English, big snobbery among the English towards the Irish. He saw them as an inferior race, a race that was unfit for the same rights and privileges as Englishmen. Sorry, I'm going to have to shut the door here. Excuse me a minute. Great. Sorry about that. My other half has a tendency to spray the insect spray, and it goes right up my nose. Can't stand it. So let's see what's going on in the chat. Tom says, so I talked to my grandma and she told me that part of our lineage is from Ireland. Oh, yes, I read that one. Brilliant. Sister Denise is in the house. She's saying, hello, Sister Shanice and Dr. Clyde, B1 from Chicago, USA. DeBuff is in the house saying, sounds like many names Irish were actually Englishmen. Wonder how aware are they of this history? Yeah, there's a mixture, there's a fusion today of English and Irish names, yes. Kashiba says, how does a name like Cleopatra? Oh, yeah, I'm going to bring a slide on that next strong. Kashiba said, this book is great. Bought it from Amazon. It's not expensive. Kwame Osei is in the house. He said, there has been ethnic cleansing in Australia, New Zealand, India, China, Japan, Palestine, etc. We have been dispossessed of our lands. Yes, indeed, Brother Kwame Osei, and thanks for bringing that out into the forefront. This is a pattern and a strategy that has been used against us as a people for centuries. Centuries, we have been dispossessed of our land. Okay, let me carry on with the reading until Dr. Clyde is ready. Now, under him served Murrah O'Brien, Lord Inchiquin. He had a varied career. In early life, he was a soldier of fortune, serving in the Spanish army in Italy. He was appointed vice president of Munster by Charles I. When the rebellions of 1641 broke out, he became the scourge of the rebellion. The rebels in Munster, he said, he became the scourge of rebels in Munster, sacking and burning, killing and hanging. On the refusal of the king to grant him the presidency of Munster, he joined the parliamentary army and for some years devoted all of his energy and military skill to the securing that province for the parliamentarians. You see, no loyalty, all about the money, a bit like the leaders that we've got today, you know? So here we have, you know, someone who was serving under King Charles I, he was trying to squash the rebellion. And the citizens were trying to take back their land. And instead of the king standing with the citizens and his, you know, generals and colonels standing with the citizens, you know, his colonel went after the rebels in Munster, sacking and burning, killing and hanging. Wow, wow, wow. But when he did all of that and the king didn't grant him the presidency of Munster, he went on the English side. He joined the parliamentarian army and devoted all of his skills and his energies that he'd acquired, you know, in the Spanish army. He gave that all to the English. So Inchiquin was responsible for the sacking of Cashel, in which he and his men slaughtered the defenders, although he had previously promised them quarter. So when you promise them quarter, family, it means that, you know, you're giving them a way out. You've gone in and you're like, you know, if you give them quarter, they'll lay down their arms and then they can leave. But when you say you're going to give them quarter and then you change your mind, that is wicked because you've made them defenseless. It's a bit like the police today, you know. Here we are as defenseless when we're walking along the street, and they will want to come and manhandle you, handcuff you, beat you up while you're handcuffed, you know, instead of giving you a fair treatment. Dr. Clyde, are you there? Did you
Oh
want to
yeah, I'm
jump
here,
in?
and I think it's very important to understand is that when you really read, you find that because of the fact that there were so many turncoats, because of the fact that
Mm.
that many of the Irish were really in a sense, you know, supporters of the British monarchy, it was really hard for them to get anything started. For example, we read in a sense that that Monster by Charles I. When appointed vice president of Manchester by Charles I, when the rebellion of 1641 broke out, he became the scourge. Think about that. He was supposed to be helping them, but he became the scourge of the Irish. And he became the scourge of the Irish because there were so many turncoats, so many people in a sense that pretended that they wanted the Irish to be free when they really, in a sense, were just working for the monarchy. They were working for the British. And because they were working for the British, it was very difficult for them, in a sense, to get things really done for the Irish people. And let's read his said, a short time later, he again changed sides, but was not as active on behalf of the king as he had been for the parliamentarians. Because he was a turncoat, so many times he was never really trusted by the Irish. In fact, he was still remembered for his fierce and unrelenting hatred of the Catholic Church. He was known to the Irish as Marug the Butcher. And this is very important to understand is that we had this whole idea of that just because you were Irish, that didn't mean that you were Catholic. And we find in a sense that because of this dichotomy between Catholics and Protestants, we also see this in terms of the Irish, is that you may have been born Irish, but if you didn't really have that strong, you know, background in Catholicism, you weren't really, in a sense, for the Irish people. You were more for the monarchy and for the English, you know.
Hmm.
And so then, even though the Owen Roe O'Neill was as gone as the great Clare O'Neill's, one of his forebears, being Neil of the nine hostages who had who had
Oops, you
raided
skipped that.
Gaul for slaves. Again, in a
Sorry,
sense,
Dr.
they were making these Irish people into slaves.
Yeah,
This is
you
where the
jumped.
first slaves came from.
Yeah. You jumped a paragraph. You jumped. So just if you go back to the top of page 17, I just saw you jumped a paragraph there.
The Catholic
So you finished
Confederation.
with the burner. Yeah, and his army was mainly made up of Protestants of English origin, like you said. But so top of 17, the Catholic Confederation. Mhm.
The Catholic Confederation of Kilkenny, which was set up in 1641, also had a standing army. The Pope sent Cardinal Giovanni Battista Renuncini as papal nuncio to the Confederation in 1645. He was warmly welcomed to some of the officers of the Confederation, including Richard Butler, the brother of the Earl of Osmode. Renuncini reported, at the time of my arrival, the greater part of the Catholic troops were under the command of two generals, Owen O'Neill and Thomas Preston, who were not only, in a sense, rivals by nature and from party spirit, but embittered by jealousy from having both served to the Flemish wars and from having even then show signs of mutual aversion. So we find, in a sense, that even the leaders of the Irish people themselves were disunified. They didn't really, in a sense, really have any sense of Irish nationalism. What it was, in a sense, is that they were mainly mercenaries. And I think this is something that we had to understand is that to be a soldier back in the 17th century, it was about whoever paid the money, you see. But I think it's very important to remember is that we find when we read this book is that many of the Irish soldiers who fought against the British, they were not allowed. They were not allowed to stay in Ireland. They were sold to European armies. They were sold to France, Spain, whereas the Irish women, they were sent to the to Bermuda. So we find in a sense that you had the Irish women in Bermuda and their husbands, brothers, and sons in Germany or somewhere fighting on the European continent. This is a great dichotomy, but it shows in a sense how 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 for the black Irish it was a terrible time. That's why in a
Mhm,
sense it was almost hell to be in Ireland and to be in a sense a black Irishman.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and imagine at a time when they're supposed to be united against to fight against the English, they were divided among themselves. Isn't that similar to where we're at today as a people? Instead of being united as a people to fight against the enemy, we are divided among ourselves and fight among ourselves. And while we're fighting among ourselves, our enemies are arming themselves to deal with us good and proper. Yeah. Continue, please, Dr. Clyde.
Okay, I'm going to
Okay.
skip a few
What do I skip?
paragraphs and go down to the bottom of
Oh,
page 17.
okay.
O'Neill's hatred of Osmond was such that he
And
that he
he and he
eventually
eventually
joined the parliamentary forces under General Monk. Monk, it was sometimes spelled, the general gave certain assurances to him, granting him and his men indemnity for the past and assurances that these regions and the states would be respected. O'Neill also received 30 barrels of powder and matches and bullets, 100 cows, and 400 pounds in cash, all in condition that he should march to the relief of Derry, then besieged by royalists. O'Neill joined Butcher Coutts' parliamentary army to lift the siege, but the royalists withdrew as they approached. In other words, in a sense, we find that because of the fact that you had this dichotomy between the Irish, some were with the royalists, some were with the people. We find in a sense that in most cases, their leaders had always been mercenaries. And since their leaders had always been mercenaries, they were ready to sell each other out at the drop of a dime. It's a shame in a sense that we don't really find. And this is something, I remember I saw movies, and they talked about Ireland and the British fighting. They made it appear as though the Irish were more nationalistic, but it doesn't seem like they were so nationalistic to me. It seems as though the Irish, in a sense, were kind of, mercenary in the sense. Especially many of the elites and nobility, they were people in a sense who were hustlers, trying to make a way to make money.
Yes, indeed. Just imagine at a time when you're supposed to be uniting to fight the war against your common enemy, you've got one side of the army selling out and joining the other, joining the British, joining the English. Oh my days. Like you said, it was just all about the money, no loyalty at all. Yes, you carrying on, Dr. Clyde?
I can, if you wish.
Yeah, go ahead.
The first battle of the Parliamentary War in Ireland was fought and won before Cromwell's ever reached the country. It took place near Rathmines County, Dublin, on 22nd July 1649, between a royalist force of 7,000 men under the command of Lieutenant General Ormond and a much smaller force of 2,000 parliamentarians commanded by Colonel Michael Jones. Jones surprised the royalists, who were preparing to besiege Dublin, and in the space of a couple of hours routed them. Osmond claimed that he lost 600 men, although according to De Ross, 3,000 were slain, and 2,100 soldiers and 150 officers were taken prisoners, including one of Armand's Catholic brothers. Colonel Richard Butler. In addition, the parliamentarians took all their baggage, arms, ammunition, and money chests containing 4,000 pounds. Ormond himself narrowly escaped capture. It's very important to understand is that many of the British who were fighting in Ireland, these were professional soldiers. These were professional soldiers, as I mentioned earlier. Many of the Irish who were fighting, these were just common people. Many of these were just local people who maybe picked up a musket, or they had limited, in a sense, maybe they knew how to shoot a musket, but they didn't have military training. They didn't have that background fighting wars, and as a result, because of the fact that the revolution in Ireland was a revolution by the average Irishman. It meant in the sense that the revolution didn't have the necessary people with military expertise to really make it go in the direction that could help the Irish to really have their own country. You know.
Mm-hmm. So for time, we'll skip forward a little bit here. So this Ormond, he goes on to lose a number of battles, and he's laying the blame elsewhere. So he basically just was totally incompetent, and thousands of men lost their lives under him because of his incompetence. So here we go. After Ormond's defeat at Rathmines, this is page 20, he arranged a meeting with Owen Roe and Neil to combine forces to defeat Cromwell. It's a bit late now, isn't it? So Neil sent 3,000 men. Yeah, O'Neill still sent 3,000 men to Ormond's aid and promised to meet him in the middle of December. The meeting never took place. O'Neill died on the 6th of November. Boy, this Ormond is coming like one big jinx. So Cromwell did not waste any time after landing in Dublin. After 2 days, he set out for Drogheda and Dundalk, vital keys to the north. As an old campaigner, he knew the value of time and was determined not to allow Ormond to regroup his scattered army. And on the 31st of August, Cromwell marched out of the city at the head of 10,000 horse and foot soldiers with a plentiful supply of provisions and artillery train, such as had not been seen previously in Ireland. Before leaving, he issued a proclamation that farmers and other folk who brought provisions to the army were to receive ready money for their goods. So here we are. So Cromwell is trying to friend up the peasants now. If they feed the army, they will be paid. And the royalists were resolved to hold Drogheda, and Ormond ordered the fortification to be repaired. However, despite the feverish preparation, Drogheda was still short of provisions for a prolonged siege. So here we are, Ormond again, totally ill prepared to defend the Irish forts. And in some cases, the fortifications that he prepared was very weak. A week before Cromwell appeared before the city, the governor, Sir Arthur Aston, wrote to Ormond and was basically saying, look, yesterday they came from Dunkirk, 10 barrels of powder, but very little match. And that is the thing most wanting here. And for a round of shots. So basically, they were lacking in arms. So he was saying, I beseech your excellency to please give speedy orders for us to receive the goods that we need. Food as well, belly food, he says, I perceive will prove scarce among us. Ormond was in no position to send these supplies as his own resources were running low. So the town was held by 2,220 foot soldiers and 320 horsemen, nearly all of whom were Irish. They were commanded by Sir Arthur Aston. He's the one who was begging for the supplies, a Catholic from Cheshire, an old soldier who had served in the army of Poland against the Turks. He had returned to England at the outbreak of the Civil War and was appointed Colonel General of the Dragoons. He saw service at Edgehill, and it was said of him that there was none in the King's army with a greater reputation for bravery. Both he and Ormond hoped to hold Drogheda until winter set in, and hunger and sickness would weaken the besieging forces sufficiently for Ormond to attack them. Before the debacle at Rathmines, Ormond had sent Inchiquin with a force of 2,000 men south to Munster. This was another mistake, because there was a rumour that Cromwell intended to land there, and it was one of many mistakes of Ormond's campaign. Most of Inchiquin's men were Protestants of English descent and had no wish to fight their fellow countrymen in Cromwell's army. So they deserted in squadrons to join the parliamentarian army whenever the opportunity offered. Wow, wow, wow. Here we are, family, jumping ship, the first opportunity. Having encamped his army around the city and placed his batteries of big guns in position, Cromwell, on the 10th of September 1649, sent a demand for surrender to Aston. Sir, having brought the army belonging to the Parliament of England before this place, to reduce it to obedience, to the end diffusion of blood, may be prevented, I thought fit to summons you to deliver the same into my hands to their use. If this is refused, you will have no cause to blame me. I expect your answer, and rest your servant. Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell's offer was refused. Cromwell lowered the white flag, turned up the red flag, and basically they just besieged and stormed Drogheda. And it says here that upon Tuesday the 10th of this instant, about 5 o'clock in the evening, they began the storm, and after some hot dispute, we entered, about 700 or 800 men, the enemy disputing it very swiftly with us. And indeed, through the advantages of the place and the courage of God, was pleased to give the defenders, our men, were forced to retreat, quite out of breath, not without some considerable loss. Cromwell does not mention that he, sword in hand, led the second assault, although the men that stormed the breaches were forced to recoil. Yet being encouraged to recover their loss, they made a second attempt, wherein God was pleased to animate them, that they got ground of the enemy, and by the goodness of God forced them to quit his entrenchment. So God must have been busy that day in Drogheda, because later that night the Roundheads were the victors and ran amok. No mercy was shown, as Cromwell had declared on the previous day that if the defenders of Drogheda held out, no quarter would be given. Ormond later hotly disputed this. All the officers and soldiers promised quarter, so as such they would lay down their arms, and performed it as long as any place held out, which encouraged others to yield. But when they had all at once laid down their arms and their power, and there was no fear that they could hurt them, then they heard the word, "No quarter!" And that went round, and the soldiers were forced by many of them against their wills to kill the prisoners. Wow, wow, wow. So in all, 44 captains, all the lieutenants and insignias, 220 reformados, an officer who for some reason was deprived of his command but retained his rank, and troopers and 2,500 foot soldiers were killed, according to a list published by the Perfect Journal in London on the 2nd of October 1649. So there's a big hot dispute. All these had been promised quarter, others seeing the fate of their commanders, determined to fight to the bitter end. So it was the commanders who had put down their arms. They were promised quarter, but Cromwell didn't give them any quarter. So the others fought to the bitter end. Just to run forward in this chapter, so we get to the end of the chapter for today. With Sir Arthur Aston, it turns out that he had a wooden leg, and the word was that it was full of gold. So when they captured him, they ripped off his wooden leg, and when it wasn't found to be full of gold, they used his wooden stump leg to batter him and bludgeon him to death. And then they hacked his body into pieces. And the slaughtering went on all that night and for the next 4 days. Not only were the defenders killed in cold blood, but the priests and the nuns were especially singled out and slaughtered in a particularly gruesome manner. A manuscript history of these events, written at the time of one of the Jesuit fathers employed on the Irish mission and preserved in the archives of the Irish College in Rome, gives further details of the cruelty exercised towards the priests that were seized. It says,
Can I read
when
that?
yes, go ahead.
Okay. When the city was captured by the heretics, the blood of the Catholics was mercilessly shed in the streets, in the dwelling houses, and in the open fields. To name, was mercy shown? Nor to the women, not to the aged, not to the young. On the following day, when the soldiers were searching through the ruins on the city, they discovered one of our fathers named John Taft, and his brother, a secular priest. Suspecting that they were religious, they examined them and finding that they were priests, and one of them, moreover, a Jesuit, they led them off to triumph and accompanied by a rumulous crowd, conducted them to the marketplace. And there, as if they were at length extinguishing the Catholic religion and society, they tied them both to stakes fixed in the ground and pierced their bodies with shots till they expired. Just think about that, just the hate and what they wanted to do to the religion. They wanted Catholicism just knocked out of the people. Cromwell, referring to the storming of Drogheda, wrote in a letter to John Bradshaw, president of the Council of State, dated 17 September 1649. It hath pleased God to bless our endeavors at Drogheda. The enemy were about 3,000 strong in the town. Before we entered, we refused them quarter, having the day before summoned the town. I do not think 30 of the whole number escaped with their lives. Those that did are safe in custody for Barbados. Yet in another letter to the Speaker of the Parliament in England, also dated on the same day as before he wrote, the next day the two other towers were summoned, in one of which was about 6 or 7 score, but they refused to yield themselves, and we, knowing that hunger must compel them, set only good guards to secure them from running away until their stomachs were come down. From one of the said towers, notwithstanding their condition, they killed and wounded some of our men. When they submitted, their officers were knocked on the head, and every 10th man of the soldiers killed, and the rest shipped to the Barbados. The soldiers in the other tower were all spared, as their lives only, and shipped likewise to Barbados for the Barbados. This would show that a greater number were shipped there than Cromwell indicated in his letter. In the years that followed, many thousands more men, women, and children were shipped into slavery to Barbados and the other colonies. It's very important to understand that you can see from this family that they were using the Irish to be the laborers in Barbados. They were taking these black Irishmen, women, men, children, and forcing them to be the workers on this island. And slavery was very terrible in Barbados. I think it was more terrible in Barbados, I think, than in Jamaica. And see, but we find it was very terrible because most of the slaves that were in Barbados were Irish and they were Catholics. And I think this added to the English hating the people in Barbados so much.
Yeah. Brother Kwame also says it's ironic now that white Irish were involved in the enslavement of African people that built cities like Dublin, Belfast, Cork, etc., and that today there is massive anti-African racism in Ireland. So yeah, the original people of Ireland were indeed the Africans, and although they haven't specified in the first chapter that we were reading, the people who were shipped to Barbados and were slaughtered by the English were actually Africans. At the beginning, we actually set out the fact that the original indigenous population of people were indeed Africans, and where they refer to them as an inferior race, where they're referring to them in the way that they refer to the Africans from the continent, you can see a similarity in the language to how they spoke about us. But yes, Dublin, Belfast, Cork, these were all cities built by the indigenous Africans. The Irish of today have basically inherited, are the descendants of the English that inherited the African land. As we go through the book, you will see that more clearly. And then he says, look what happened in Belfast the other week. African people having their houses firebombed and even dragged out of their houses. You know, this is the nature of the so-called English. This is what we're reading about, the barbarity, you know, the sickness, and the sickness in their character and their nature that enables them to do what they did to other races of people. And it's still continuing today. You know, what we're reading about here took place in the 17th century against a group of people because they were Catholics. And, you know, they called themselves English and they called themselves Protestants. They called themselves parliamentarians. But look at what they did to the Catholics. I mean, we just read that they were slaughtering them for 4 days straight. Can you imagine the river of blood that must have been running through the streets of Drogheda after 4 days of slaughtering? People tried to hide in churches. They burnt the churches with the people in them. Wow, wow, wow. Well, next week or next strong, we're going to continue in episode 2, and we're going to be looking at the rape of Wexford and what actually happened there. Another classic example of what Cromwell and his army were doing in cities in Ireland. More history that has been hidden. And then in episode 3, we don't start it next strong, we're going to be looking at the transplantation. We're going to be talking about, you know, the people of Ireland who were transported from Ireland to Barbados, Jamaica, Virginia, in America, and other parts of North America. And his documentation of that. And you can make of it, you know, what you will. Wow. Again, we're talking about little known history, our history, the history of Ireland that involved us as a people. And if you missed the beginning where I gave you Benjamin Franklin's quotes, do go and check that out as well. Okay, a very important quote that tells you from an eyewitness account what the population and what the makeup was of that region in the 1700s. Dr. Clyde, can we have a few words from you to round up?
I think it's very important to understand is that there appears to have been a very great problem in Ireland at this time. And that problem is that on the one hand, you had the English who saw the conflict in terms of a racial or ethnic conflict, whereas the Irish, they were dumb. They thought it was a religious thing. And they thought that it was just because of their religion. But it's clear to me that when you really look at the way that the British treated the Irish, they not these Irish, not the Irish of the 19th century, but they treated these Irish not only in a sense terribly because of the fact that they were in a sense Catholic, but also because they were dark. Even though the British may have been dark at the time, I think it was more darker Irishmen at that time than it was British. And I think that because of the fact that the British saw this as a revolutionary thing instead of a racial conflict, I think that's why many of the Irish, didn't fight as hard as they may have would have fought. Those
Yeah.
Irish who really knew the facts, they fought to the last man. They wouldn't surrender. But many times would surrender, and then Cromwell and his cohort, they would go into those towns and maybe massacre everybody.
Yeah.
So it seemed like it was a conflict that the Irish felt they were fighting a war of nationalism or nation state, whereas whereas the British saw them as a different race that they were going to destroy or kill. That's what I think it was.
Yes, indeed. And as you were speaking there, Dr. Clyde, I could see what was actually happening in Sudan, where we've got the Arabs who are financing the war in Sudan. They're fighting to expand the Arab territory. For them, it's Arab nationalism. For them, they want to take over the whole of the north of Africa, and they're pushing their way into Central Africa. They are expanding, as Arab. They want an Arab world, just like the English, wanted an English world. And they were fighting the natives of all the different lands to take over their land. And then the people of those lands, like the Sudanese today, instead of sticking together and fighting against the Arabs, they're fighting each other. You've got the Muslim Arabs fighting the ethnic traditional people of Sudan. So they're fighting each other. And this is what we were doing back then, fighting each other in the name of being either a Catholic or a Protestant or an Anglican or a parliamentarian or whatever, or a royalist, instead of standing together against English expansionism. Yeah. Family, we've got to learn from history. There's nothing new under the sun. And what we've been through as a people, wow, wow, wow. It's a miracle that we've survived it until today. But the war against us is continuing to be fought against us. And we've got to unify and stop fighting each other in order for us to survive. Family in the chat, I want to thank you so, so much. Don't forget the UAE. Absolutely. Yeah, the UAE are the ones who are financing and fueling the war in Sudan, because for them, it's about their uniting as Arabs, United Arab Emirates. They're uniting as Arabs as part of their Arab expansionism policy. And they are basically just taking a leaf out of the English playbook. Take care, family. All being well, we will be back next strong. Dr. Clyde, oh, it's a privilege and an honor. You're on mute. I certainly look forward to you joining us next strong. Dr. Clyde, let's give you final words. You're still on mute. I can see you're talking, but we can't hear you. You're on mute. You need to unmute on your computer. Oh, maybe he's taking a call on his phone. That's why he's talking.
Yeah, it's a telephone call. I'm sorry.
Oh, I worked it out in the end. Okay. All righty. Thank you so, so much, Dr. Clyde. As always, it's a privilege and an honor. We look forward to you joining us next strong for episode 2 in our new series, The Cleansing. What is it? What we called it? The ethnic cleansing of Ireland. Take care, family. Stay strong and powerful.
And family, we're gonna discuss chapter 3 next week, beginning with chapter 3. So read up with the chapter so you can be ready.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Take care.